In August 1997, I found myself in a place where I never dreamed that I would be. I stepped off the commuter bus at 6 a.m. in Washington, D.C. to begin my first day of work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Economic Research Service. I'll never forget my feelings getting off the bus that morning. I wondered aloud, what am I doing here? As a person who felt much more comfortable in the boreal forest, I just didn't know how this experience was going to work out for me. I'll share many lessons from what happened over the next 2.5 years there, but today I'd like to share some thoughts about how some of our national heroes grounded me in a place where self-interest, lobbyists, and political machinations were ever present. I will argue that we need national heroes today as much as we ever have. Whenever I felt extra frustrated in D.C. by what seemed to be far removed from what I believed about the ideals of our government, during lunch I would leave the office, hop on the metro, and ride to a stop nearest one of the national monuments. My favorite monument was the Jefferson Memorial. Sitting in that inspiring rotunda with the statue of Thomas Jefferson and ringed by the inspired words, "For I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man," well, that was always an intensely rejuvenating experience for me. During one of my visits to the Jefferson Memorial, I bought this book, The Life and Selected Writings of Thomas Jefferson. This is the very copy, in fact. I've read it thoroughly. It is full of marked passages, notes in the margins, and sticky notes. We have a lot of books at home. Let me show you about half of them. Among all of these, The Life and Selected Writings of Thomas Jefferson is one of the most treasured books in my personal library. As the primary author of our nation's Declaration of Independence, I greatly admire the man who was among those who pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to establish a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Let me share with you just a few thoughts from his book that have inspired me over the years. In 2 separate letters to Peter Carr, a favorite nephew, he wrote, "Whenever you are able to do a thing, though it can never be known but to yourself, ask yourself, how would you act were the whole world looking at you, and act accordingly." What wondrous advice that is. How would our world change today if we followed that wisdom? He continued to his nephew, "Above all things, lose no occasion of exercising your dispositions to be grateful, to be generous, to be charitable, to be humane, to be true, just, firm, orderly, courageous." Again, such beautiful, transformative counsel. He wrote to his friend Alexander Donald these words, "I had rather to be shut up in a very modest cottage with my books, my family, and a few old friends, and letting the world roll on as it liked, than to occupy the most splendid post which any human power can give." Well, you've just seen some pictures of my books. So you know I'm not exaggerating when I say that Thomas Jefferson is a role model for me. My wife and I live in a modest home, one built in a mining community in northeast Minnesota in the 1920s. I've had to work on it much for over 20 years to make it comfortable for us. But those stories are for later messages. Did you know that later in Jefferson's life he was in serious financial distress? The introduction to the book teaches us why. It says this: "He had undertaken so many projects for the advancement of a neighbor or friend, a worthy paper or cause, that carefully as he kept his accounts, his expenses still ran high." The account continues by explaining that he felt he had no way forward but to sell his home, Monticello, and the surrounding farms to the highest bidder. However, when this became known, and the account continues, The almost immediate response of private citizens in New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore on hearing this news was to subscribe a sum of $16,000 to aid the leader who had devoted his industry and resourcefulness to all America for half a century. The sting of being thus helped was almost dissolved in Jefferson's recognition that the subscription had been spontaneous, the citizens' pure and unsolicited offering of love. The lesson I hope to pass on to my children and anyone else willing to listen today is to rediscover heroes in our national life. Heroes as national symbols have been subjected to much disillusionment and diminishment, especially over the past half century or so. But in our quest for realism and transparency, have we traded away one of the most potent forces for enhancing national belonging and a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good? I say that we need them now, as much as we ever have. Thomas Jefferson dreamed of an aristocratic America, but it was a far different kind of aristocracy than had persisted in Europe and elsewhere. He wrote, "Instead of an aristocracy of wealth, of more harm and danger than benefit to society, we should make an opening for an aristocracy of virtue and talent. In other words, we should make a country where heroes are remembered, and where heroes marked by their virtue and talent are found scattered with equal hand throughout our nation, even here in the far-removed boreal forests of Minnesota. Let's rediscover our heroes, and let's become heroes, as is our right and responsibility in this nation of the people, by the people, and for the people." Until next time, I want to wish you all the best from the wilderness.